In this lesson, we're going to look at various ways to model the walls. Now, with everything in a workflow, there are always splits where you have different choices. Now, what I'm going to do in this lesson is show you a couple of the options that you do have, and then show you at the end of the lesson why the one option is highly recommended and why it is going to be the fastest and especially the easiest to edit after you've created your building. Now, let's just go through a few steps before we start modeling the walls. The one thing we want to do is we want to create a new layer first of all. So let's create one called O2 walls, and we're going to have that active and ticked. Then I'm going to, just before I close that layer manager, I'm going to also turn off the site mesh, and I'm going to turn on some of the CAD information that we have for the house, just so that we can start looking at the ground floor plans and also the section and the elevation from this side. Now, already there are a couple of different options. You can start drawing your walls from the plan. There are some people that would go to the extent of drawing their walls in elevation first. So those people may want to go the route of looking at the elevation and then starting to draw the outlines of those walls from those elevations. So they may want to do this, they may want to draw the wall, then they would close it off, they would draw the windows in, and they would basically be creating a vertical object that they would then move into place on plan. Now, this is one method that surely can work, but you will run into many hassles because there are a whole lot of constraints with this method. Namely, your elevations don't always reveal all the walls that you need to model. Second of all, we don't even have all the elevations, and this one is actually a section, so there's actually a lot of information missing to use this type of method, which is elevational in Origin. So what we're rather going to do is we're going to leave that alone, and we're going to focus on the plan. So I'm going to go ahead and turn off my elevation and section straight away, since I'm not going to be looking at them now, and let's just have a look at the plan and the different methods that we can use to draw walls off the plan. Now, the one way is to start off with a simple line, and you can go in and let's just say that we're going to draw this wall here. Now, you can go in and you can trace out the entire wall using I to pan around the scene, and you can basically finish it off there, close it off, and then you can add a extrude modifier to it. You can, let's say that that is going to be 2 meters high, and then you can go and adjust that height based upon your elevational information or from the other CAD plans that you may have on your drawing. Now, this is all well and fine, but one of the shortcomings with this method is that you're going to have a three-dimensional object that you're going to have to manipulate and edit later, which means on certain walls where you have windows or doors or anything like that, you're going to have to now start editing a three-dimensional object, which means you're going to have to edit both this face, the face on the other side, and you're going to have to bridge polys in between the two faces, and it just becomes a whole lot of work. You're basically doubling or tripling your workload by using a wall which at its origin is already a three-dimensional shape. So the other wall feature that you can use, and it's quite similar to this method, is one that is hidden down in your AEC extended list, and this one is called wall, conveniently. Now, what you can do with this is that you can go and measure your walls. So you can, for example, go in here and you can see what all of your wall widths are. So let's say 0.3 meters. And you can go to your AEC extended wall and you can actually set that width directly into that parameter. And you can set the height up to whatever it is, and then let's say it is left justified. You can then start drawing in your wall using your snaps and basically go in and snap onto those left edges. So I'm just going to do that in plan rather. And let's see if this is even going to snap for us. So I'm just going to show you in principle that the wall tool basically looks like this. You can see that every time you create a wall, you have a three-dimensional object being created, and it has these segments cut down the corners at the angle that you're making it at. So here you can see that there's your wall object, and just as with the first example, you already have a three-dimensional object to work with. So this one is even more difficult, in my opinion, to work with, because here at least you have some hierarchy coming back down to the original two-dimensional line. Here you have absolutely nothing. You have a wall object, you have a couple of parameters to it that you can look at, but otherwise you're going to eventually flatten this out to an ordinary editable poly, and then you're going to have to work with that in quite a complex manner, just as the previous method shown here. So you may ask now, what is the better method? And this is the one that I do recommend, and it's one that I use with all of my projects. So what I go and do is I start drawing a simple line which has a corner-to-corner initial and drag, just because it's a straight wall, and I'm only going to draw the outside lines, but I'm not going to draw any segments that include the width of the wall. So basically that means I'm going to stop right there, and I'm just going to draw those outside lines. So now let's just have a look at this, and after that I add an extrude modifier, so EXT enter. And here you can set your height. So already you have a nice parameter in there, and you still have the history of the original line going down there. And the next thing I do is I add an editable poly, and that editable poly will now allow me to go and select any of the segments. I can now go and connect them. I can add doorways. I can add height segments if I like to create the top of a door, for example. And I can then go and modify that poly in a very simple way, because I'm now working with a two-dimensional object. Also, it's a good idea just to make sure that your faces are, that your polygons are facing in the right direction. So let's just go and select all of those, scroll down, hit flip, and the last modifier we're going to add is a shell modifier. Now this is one that I really like. It has quite a lot of function to it. You can add material IDs into the edges, you can basically look at bevels, you can add segments, so it is quite a handy modifier. It's one of my favorite ones for architecture. So I'm going to just type an inner amount of 0.3 meters. That's going to be the width of my wall, so you can see I'm controlling the width here, I'm controlling the height through that, and I'm controlling the area which the wall is located in through that bottom modifier, or the bottom spline at the bottom of the modifier stack. So that is going to be the basic construct of my wall. If it's a really simple wall, I don't even need that don't need that editable poly. I can just leave it that simple. Now also you'll notice that the polys are now facing in the wrong direction because I removed that editable poly. So always remember just to keep those polys facing in the right direction. So in that method, I can now go and create a more complex wall, and let's go and, for argument's sake, choose a wall over here. So these internal walls are slightly more complex because they are T-shaped. You can't really decide what the inside and outside of it is. So let's now go and start drawing up these walls, and let's just see what we end up with. So we start off with the same method that we've done before, but now I'm going to add a vertex at the edge of every door. So you just want to make sure that you know where the wall ends, since this little rectangle here is the frame, so you don't really want to select that. And I'm going to stop the line right there. I'm not going to worry about this wall since it's going to have a different shell modifier thickness to it, so I'm going to actually create that as a separate object. So this line now is going to be extruded just like the previous example. So let's go to extrude. I'm going to now add an editable poly, and I'm going to flip that, and I'm going to now also add the top of the door jamb. So let's go and increase that to a height of 2.4 meters. So that's 2.45 plus 2.4, so it's a good idea just to know where your 0 is at, so that you can then start adding your numbers to that. So if that is 2.4, then we need to have a 2.85. So let's just select this line and move it up to 2.85. Sorry, that's 4.85. And we can now take this top line, and that can be moved up to the correct height based upon our elevation. But I'm going to look at those elevations later. What I first want to do is I just want to set up all my walls, and I'm going to worry about the heights later, since turning your sections and elevations on and off is going to be quite time consuming. So you can do that all later unless you know the exact heights already. What I also like to do at this stage is that I like to have my AutoCAD open at the same time and just go across to AutoCAD and actually measure off your distances and heights over there, and then just carry across those heights into 3D Max. It is a lot quicker to do that than actually turning on your elevations in 3D Max itself. So the last one then we're going to shell. And I believe that this is 0.15. I can double check that if I see that here it's not in the right place, but to me that looks about fine. So what we can do now before we shell it, or at least in that if we go down in the stack, is we can actually start selecting those doors, and I can delete those doors by hitting delete on my keyboard. And then you'll see once it is shelled, you already have that door in place. So you didn't have to go and add these internal polys in or anything. Just that shell command just basically does everything for you. And this is exactly what I'm going to do to all the other walls, and using different shell thicknesses for whichever wall you're working on. And that basically is the method. I'm not worried about booleaning or joining or attaching any segments of walls. For example, this one, I'm not going to worry about attaching it too much. Those can be completely separate objects. There's no real problem, especially working with interiors, or exteriors rather. If you do then get into the interior and you do want to start chamfering edges and everything, then you can start working on local rooms as separate objects. But we're not worried about that for this course. We're mainly concerned with the exteriors and getting the main structure of the walls up. That is our top priority. So there you have it. That is the quickest and simplest method, I believe, for creating walls. And in the next lesson, we're going to look at a few of the other objects that we can start modeling, things like columns and that. And then we're going to move on later into doing the floor slabs. So thanks for the lesson, and hang on for the next one where we get into more detail on this floor plan.